This is Mission Control Houston. 48 days, 16 hours, and 16 minutes into the 43rd expedition to the International Space Station. The crew on board at work on science and maintenance, and recently received word from the ground that they will not soon be greeting a new cargo ship. Right now, the International Space Station is flying in good shape, about 248 miles above the South Pacific Ocean. It's currently headed to the northeast toward the coast of Mexico. It'll overfly the Texas Gulf Coast and the eastern United States, the maritime provinces of Canada, before crossing above the North Atlantic Ocean. On board, the crew members are busy with both science and maintenance work right now. Station Commander Terry Virts and Flight Engineer Scott Kelly are back at work on the rodent research experiment that has been occupying their attention for most of the day today. Flight Engineer Gennady Podolka is doing some cleaning tasks in the Russian segment of the station, while Flight Engineer Kelly Kornienko is doing some maintenance on the Electron, the system in the Russian segment that generates oxygen for the crew members to breathe. Flight Engineer Anton Shkaplerov is doing some preparation of his Soyuz spacecraft for its departure from the station, coming up in just about 2 weeks. And Flight Engineer Samantha Cristoforetti is scheduled to be beginning her first exercise session of the day with a workout on the Advanced Resistive Exercise device. Today's the 158th day in space for Terry Virts and his Soyuz crewmates, Anton Shkaplerov and Samantha Cristoforetti. They are due to be returning to the Earth on May 13th, wrapping up their 6 months in space. It's the 34th day in space for their three crewmates, Scott Kelly, Gennady Podolka, and Kelly Kornienko, since their launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in late March. Kelly Kornienko, of course, going to be on board the space station until March of next year. In the International Space Station Flight Control Room, the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers is on duty, keeping an eye on the operation of all of the station's systems, working with the crewmates on some of their activities today. The team is led today by Flight Director Gary Horlacher, who just moved up to the table. To his right, astronaut Scott Tingle is the spacecraft communicator on the shift today. It'll be his voice that you'll hear talking with the crew members from Houston. The team here in Houston, as well as the crew on orbit, have been eagerly watching activities at the Russian Mission Control Center, where specialists have been working to recover the Progress supply ship. And today, those controllers made the decision that Progress will not be arriving at the International Space Station. The 59 Progress launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on Tuesday. It was headed for a docking to the station that was planned to take place later on Tuesday morning, carrying about 3 tons of supplies for the station crew members. Everything from water and some food to clothing and other experiment hardware that the crew members would be using during their mission. But shortly after the vehicle reached its preliminary orbit, Russian flight controllers began receiving conflicting information about the deployment of the navigational antennas and about the pressurization of the manifolds in the propulsion system. And even at that point, a decision was made to default to a rendezvous and docking to the station that would take place no earlier than Thursday morning, the old 2-day trip. Well, during passes over Russian ground communication stations subsequently on Tuesday and ever since then, the flight controllers in Moscow have tried sending commands to the vehicle with no apparent success. They were not getting any meaningful telemetry down from the Progress. And at that point, the plans for the Thursday docking were all put on hold while the troubleshooting continued. Last night, the Mission Control Center in Korolev tried commanding the propulsion system to send fuel to the thrusters, but there was no success with that either. This morning, the Russian flight control team considered the body of knowledge of their attempts to troubleshoot the issue, and they informed the station crew of their decision in regard to Progress completing its mission.
Here's Mr. Sirikov, who would like to officially address you on the progress status. How are you, Anton? How are you to the entire crew? How do you read me? Good afternoon. We have you loud and clear. This is Yuri Sirikov. I'm your SRP today. We have been requested by our MCCH colleagues, and here's the official statement. There will be no progress docking. All the resources have been used up, and so we are in the middle of the closeout operations with respect to that progress, but there will be no progress docking for this vehicle. Copy. That's all I've got for you guys. Thank you.
There was the voice of the interpreter sending the message delivered by Yuri Sirikov, the shift flight director in the Russian Mission Control Center, that the Progress vehicle would not be arriving at the International Space Station. And the work going forward to assess the vehicle is already underway there, but the Russian Flight Control Team has not yet announced its plans at this point. We will provide that information as it becomes available. The 59 Progress is not carrying any supplies that are critical for the U.S. operating segment of the station. The USOS and the Russian segment have plenty of supplies to be able to operate normally well beyond the next scheduled resupply flight. That is the SpaceX Dragon cargo ship number 7, which is now targeted to launch in mid to late June. And it'll be carrying 5,000 pounds of science investigations and supplies, including spare parts for the station's environmental control and life support system, backup spacewalk hardware, crew clothing, all things that are replaceable. You can keep up with what's going on with the Progress, find additional updates and more information online at www.nasa.gov/station. Issues on board led to a replanned day. So the issue with the Progress, plus some maintenance issues on board, led to a replanned day for the crew today. For some of them, their focus has been on science. Commander Terry Virts, flight engineer Scott Kelly started their day at work on the latest iteration of the rodent research experiment. This version of that is testing how the immune system in space reacts to a vaccine injection and whether or not that drug will actually improve immune system function. Apart from a break for lunch and for their own exercise, both of the men have their day devoted to the rodent research, although Kelly did get a short break earlier this morning to join flight engineer Kelly and Kornienko to talk about their one-year mission in interviews with the Associated Press and Westwood One. We'll have a little bit of that for you in a few minutes. Kornienko's day began with time set aside for organization of personal equipment. And that was followed by work on the Motocard experiment, which is a Russian investigation in which a cosmonaut uses the treadmill for research into the nature of locomotion disturbances during long-term spaceflight, as well as how to prevent and correct those disturbances. Flight engineer Gennady Podolka and Anton Shkaplerov started off their day with their first exercise sessions. Then Shkaplerov worked with Kornienko on the Motocard, while Podolka took care of some routine cleaning tasks in the Russian segment. Flight engineer Samantha Cristoforetti spent most of her morning working on the experiment Triple Lux A. That's a European experiment looking into the cellular mechanisms responsible for impairment of the immune function and enhancement of responses to radiation, all during long-duration spaceflight. Cristoforetti also worked in some time transferring items into the Dragon cargo ship, as well as preparations for her own return to Earth coming up in 2 weeks, when she, Virts, and Shkaplerov are scheduled to undock their Soyuz spacecraft and head home to Earth to wrap up their 6-month expedition. After a midday break, the Russian segment crew members spent time on Russian public affairs events and then got back to routine maintenance. Also for Shkaplerov, prepping of his Soyuz spacecraft for its upcoming undocking. Virts and Kelly continuing to work with the rodent research experiment. And that will continue to run until just before all 6 crew members get together for their afternoon planning conference at 2 p.m. Houston time, which will finish up their scheduled workday on orbit. Now, we've all heard the term of phrase flexing your muscles, but probably not consider that the International Space Station is constantly flexing its muscles, in a way. It does wiggle and move, as well as orbit in a straight line. And knowing that this occurs has an important effect on the design of experiments that are going on inside. Important question, though, is how do you measure that movement? NASA commentator Lori Meggs at the Marshall Space Flight Center caught up with the principal engineer for an experiment that has been measuring the movements of the space station since 2012.
This particular experiment that we're running here, the flexure experiment, really is designed to capture information about the motion, about the wiggle and the flexing of the station that is known to occur at these locations, but something that's not readily available because the sensors that can measure this are not always activated, or there may not actually be sensors in the vicinity where we're operating. You know, we're located very high in the station, and the ability to measure the flexing motion, something would be very useful to other experimenters that may have payloads that may actually be berthed near us. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're utilizing the antenna in ways not initially designed to be able to capture this data.
What is this flexure we're talking about?
The simplest analogy would be, you know, driving a minivan with your kids in the back seat, and they push off the walls or they bounce around. You actually feel that wiggle in the car, and that's exactly what happens, you know, when the crew is activated and they're not sleeping. They push off from the various modules to locomote themselves throughout the structure. And so when they do that push off, because space station is so very large, it starts exciting what we call these vibratory modes, and the system basically flexes and moves, and you'll start to see scissoring motions. So you have this large 100-meter structure which is starting to scissor and twist and do all these bendings, and those sorts of things can play havoc with pointing experiments that may be located on these truss structures. So when we say flexure, I'm talking about sort of this twisting motion that may occur out in the far reaches of the station.
How can it be used on Earth and in space? How can the information that you glean from this?
Well, I think, you know, we're really trying to supply a piece of information for future experimenters, and you know, so the flexing that we're trying to measure, obviously known to exist, the quantities, the frequencies, are useful for optical communications experiments. These experiments require really high precision pointing, and in order to stress their systems to be able to understand if they'll actually work, they need to be able to understand what these flexures are. And so it's important to have an understanding of what the magnitude of this is, so you can kind of prepare the experiment prior to it being launched, prior to it being flown. So I think what we're trying to do is provide useful data for future experimenters, which will in turn benefit longer duration, longer timeline activities, for instance, like optical communications for deep space pointing and things of that nature.
How long have you been on the station, and how long will this go on?
Well, we've been running since 2012. You know, we launched in August, transited, and then were berthed and started our commissioning activities in August of 2012, and we've been operating ever since. We've been basically a continuous shift of operations. We have an operations team, and we've been supporting that, and we'll probably continue for several years to come, you know, with new directives from the SCAM program office.
What have you learned so far?
Well, that would take probably more than this interview to conduct that. Specifically for our test here, you know, we really, you know, when we first ran this experiment, it was very difficult to extract this data and to make sense of it, but we've really refined that, and we now have a very good sense that we can actually use this Ka band antenna, not originally designed to do what it is being used for, to actually conduct these types of experiments, to actually get this flexure. And we're supporting other activities. One of them is a discrete thruster firing test, and we hope to activate our payload to be able to capture that information as well, something that, again, we hadn't originally intended to do, but something that we can do.
The engineers normally will track a data satellite with a Ka band antenna, but this team has explored using the sun as a radio source for Ka band tracking, which makes it a unique, first-of-its-kind experiment. And it's ideal because the sun is a source that is precisely known and always available. A bit earlier this morning, just before crew members took a lunch break on orbit, flight engineers Scott Kelly and Kelly and Kornienko spent a few minutes talking about the first month of their one-year mission in interviews with the Associated Press and Westwood One. And no surprise, first question, Kelly was asked about the status of the Progress vehicle.
Well, we were both told recently by both the U.S. and Russian flight control centers that Roscosmos announced that the Progress will not be docking and will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere here some days in the future to be determined. But the Progress is not coming to this Progress is not coming to the space station.
Well, now tell me, what kind of an impact do you expect on your day-to-day life up there? And was there something in particular you had been looking forward to getting?
Well, we have a lot of redundancy on board the space station. We you know, the program plans for these kind of things to happen. They're very unfortunate when they do, but we do have, you know, we do have supplies on board, and you know, one of the great things about this international partnership is that we do have other vehicles that can resupply the space station. You know, when we had the Columbia accident, we were fortunate to have the Soyuz to be able to keep the space station manned, and we have other vehicles now, SpaceX, HTV, and hopefully Orbital soon, that can continue to resupply us. So we should be okay. Long-term impact, you know, both programs are looking at that right now. But I think we're going to be in good shape.
Of a partial liking to, like an inclination, I should say. Was there anything in particular that you're really sorry that you're not going to get at this point in time?
Well, I'm not familiar with everything that was on the vehicle. I know the stuff that was on the manifested for the U.S. operational segment, which was a lot of clothing for Kjell Lindgren and Kimia Yui, also some EVA hardware. But, you know, the important thing is hardware can be replaced, and we'll replace all that hardware, and we'll continue to operate the space station.
All right. Well, moving on to other matters, you're 1 month into a one-year mission. What's been the hardest and easiest thing to get used to so far? I'll ask that of both of you.
Well, for me, nothing's been hard to get used to. I felt like I had just left, both physically and you know, mentally, in my ability to operate on board the space station. So, you know, I'm feeling great. Looking forward to a great mission, and I'll hand the mic over to Misha.
Михаил, вы пролетали уже 1 месяц из годичной экспедиции.
Еще раз.
Вы пролетали уже 1 месяц из годичной экспедиции, то есть 1/10 часть работы сделана. Как вы себя чувствуете в этой связи?
I feel pretty well. I don't worry about anything. With so I don't worry about anything. Of course, progress is a big concern and big Но это немножко подрывает наши планы.
It slightly changes our plans, but as Scott said, we are quiet and we are 100% confident that we will be living and working very productively on board of the International Space Station up until the time when the next cargo vehicle is going to come. And we don't have any problems. We have outstanding psychological support and everything is fine, with the slight exception of the progress situation.
Oh, thank you. What are some of the biggest changes up there that you've noticed since your last visits?
When I was here last, we had just gotten the PMM on board the space station, and now we're using it for a lot of our stowage. So that's cleared up a lot of other areas on board the space station. So that's one change. It makes working easier when you don't have as much stuff, in your way in the working modules. So that's nice. We have 4 space-to-ground channels now. That's very helpful. That kind of smooths out operations with regards to our ability to communicate with the ground. We also have iPads that we use for some procedures, and that gives you a little bit more flexibility on working in tight or awkward locations on board, and having the procedure right there with you. So that's some of the changes, positive changes all. Otherwise, the space station really looks a lot like it did, for me 4 years ago, which is a good sign. I think it's, great material condition here on board, and we should be able to continue to do great work here for many, many years to come.
It's a little bit of Scott Kelly and Kornienko's conversation this morning. You can see the entire event coming up later today on the NASA TV video file. That'll be at 11 o'clock Central Time. The science for Kelly and Kornienko's one-year mission is very heavy on learning how prolonged exposure to weightlessness impacts the human body, which is something we have to know to deal with on trips out into the solar system. But overall, the mission of the station is delivering in other ways, helping foster international cooperation and a commercial space program, and generating benefits for humanity today, even through the exercise program designed for the astronauts.
Being an educator today is not easy. We here at Heights Elementary School are not here simply to educate our students in the academic realm. It's so important for our students to be lifelong learners, and we have to think about ways that we motivate them to do so.
There are so many distractions that we have to compete with.
iPads, Xbox, video games,
Internet.
Far too many channels of cable television.
What we need is something that kids will be highly motivated about, something to keep them physically fit as well as making nutritionally sound choices.
What we needed was a new tool to help these kids think about diet and exercise in order to make the healthy choices they need to.
I knew what that tool was. It was something that inspired me as a kid and continues to inspire me today. The space program.
The importance of an astronaut's physical exercise and proper diet cannot be understated, not just for the fitness of the astronaut, but also to ensure that they stay mentally focused and productive during their stay on the International Space Station and for future missions, whether it be to asteroids, the Moon, or Mars.
In response to the rising childhood obesity rate, NASA has developed a series of activities based on astronaut training, and we call that Train Like an Astronaut.
Examples of the Train Like an Astronaut activities include things that we do exactly as we do on the ISS: cycling, resistance training, and cardiovascular. And then onto dexterity, putting puzzles together, making healthy food choices, and working as a team. all activities as they truly do on the ISS.
Train Like an Astronaut activities are flexible enough to be used in conjunction with other programs like NFL Play 60. What makes this program unique is that we're using the human challenges of space flight to inspire as well as motivate our children to make healthy choices throughout their life.
We're currently in 24 countries with over 24,000 participants and growing every year.
This has expanded to such an incredible opportunity for both myself and for educators around the world to make such an impact on the lives of children, both with fitness as well as nutrition.
It was excitement for the whole thing that the students, they weren't just doing exercises anymore. They were training like an astronaut.
The true success of this program is the educators. An example of a teacher that has worked and motivated his children is an outstanding educator by the name of Tim Vigorito. This gentleman excited them and inspired them in ways that we never could do it. And with that, he's helping us grow the 21st century leadership that we so desperately need.
Mr. Vigorito is extremely passionate about the Train Like an Astronaut program.
I think he himself would like to be an astronaut.
He comes to life when he's teaching the kids and talking about the program. The kids feel that enthusiasm.
We're just so fortunate to have him. Oh, it's truly the case.
They say your astronaut training doesn't begin when NASA hires you.
Cool.
It begins when you're young, by learning about space and the world around us, and by making healthy choices in life. Today, I'd like to recognize an outstanding physical education teacher, Tim Vigorito, for being a champion for the Train Like an Astronaut program and influencing thousands of students to date.
Wow.
It is educators like you that truly make a difference in this world, and who will inspire the next generation to propel humankind on future missions to Mars and beyond.
This is too much. For me, it's become a way of life, and I'm just so thankful to everyone for what it's done for me. I just want to share that with my students. Maybe it'll inspire them to reach a little deeper, or to go a little further, or maybe to try a little harder, whatever it is in life.
Crew on board the International Space Station has a couple of more hours of work in their day-to-day. Looking ahead to more cargo operations tomorrow, plus a variety of human life sciences research, and then an extra day off, a 3-day weekend still to come. A reminder that today's NASA TV video file is coming up at 11 o'clock Central Time this morning, with news from all over the nation's space agency. Our next live report on space station activity will be tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Central Time. At a mission elapsed time of 48 days, 16 hours, and 44 minutes into the International Space Station's Expedition 43, this is Mission Control, Houston.